if I have to crawl. Gonna give old Jeff's boys just a little of my rifle ball. I'm gonna cross the mountain, oh, fare you well. Gonna cross the mountain, you can hear my banjo sound.
Welcome to CCBC TV's Arts Showcase, a series featuring performances from the campuses of the Community College of Baltimore County. I'm Monica Otal, Professor of Music and Concert Manager at CCBC. Today's Arts Showcase features the internationally known musicians, folklorists, and storytellers Sparky and Rhonda Rucker. They will take you on an educational and emotional journey as they perform their program, The Blue and Gray in Black and White, commemorating the Sesquicentennial of the American Civil War.
We are in the throes of what has been called the Sesquicentennial of the Great Civil War. Sesquicentennial, 150 years. You'd think 150 years would be long enough for people to get over their problems with that war. But 150 years is not a long time. I remember when I was a youngin', going to my grandfather's church, Church of God, Sanctified Church. Down on the front pew were always two or three wizened old black folk that they said, you know, she was a slave. And when I was a kid, I'd go to the parades, Armistice Day Parade, Veterans Day parades and such. And there was always an open-topped Cadillac with a couple of old white men dressed in blue or gray who were veterans of the Civil War, still alive at that time. So I'm here to tell you it was not that long ago. And especially where I come from, they were on the side that lost. So it's still an open wound. But I'm also here to tell you that the Civil War is what gave us this nation. It was not the war fought 1770s. That just got us away from German George. We were still calling ourselves separate colonies. I'm a Virginian, I'm a Delawarean, I'm a Marylander, I'm a Tennessean. We would say the United States are. We spoke of it as a plurality. But after the Civil War was when we said the United States is a single entity. A nation founded on freedom. Very first document said all men are created equal. Took them a long time to include women in that. Some folks still haven't made up their mind about the Native American so-called Indians, because Christopher Columbus got lost on his way to India, and the first people he saw, well, these must be Indians. And certainly the West African, brought to this country not because he wanted to, but because he was forced to come. So we are a nation that's in the process of trying to become what we claim to be. And when this country was a mere 80 some odd years old, they went to war over those differences. Abraham Lincoln, November of 1860, elected president of the United States. 1 month later, December of 1860, hotheads down in South Carolina seceded from the Union, followed by 6 other southern states making a provisional Confederate government that had its headquarters in Montgomery, Alabama. In February of 1861, Jefferson Davis took the oath of office as the provisional president of the Confederacy. March of 1861, Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office. See, nowadays we do it in January. Back in those days, they did it in March. He vowed to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of these United States. 1 month later, April of 1861, Those same hotheads in South Carolina fired on the federal flag in Fort Sumter there in Charleston Harbor. The nation was at war. Abraham Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to put down the insurrection, and rather than fight their sister southern states, all of the people from the upper South, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, they too pulled out of the Union. A failed attempt by Kentucky and Maryland, making 11 states in the Confederate government. The nation was at war. Oh, people thought it was going to be a fun war. Woo! Got to join up because it's going to be over by Christmas time. Don't want to miss it. Oh, yeah. Young men stirred their blood, want to put on the uniforms of blue and gray. Songwriters of that day began to write stirring melodies to fire the blood. People like Henry Clay Work, Stephen Collins Foster, and George Frederick Root, who wrote this song. Won't you rally round the flag, boys, rally once again. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom. Rally from the hillside, gather from the plains. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom. It's the Union forever. Hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor and up with the stars as we rally round the flag, boys. Rally once again. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will welcome to our number the loyal, true, and brave. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom. And oh, rebel crew from that land we love the best. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom. It's a union forever. Hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor and up with the stars as we rally round the flag, boys. Rally once again. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom. It's the Union forever. Hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor and up with the stars as we rally round the flag, boys. Rally once again. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom. But the reality of war is young men die. Old men start the wars. Young men die in them. Who can forget Shiloh and the young man who came from West Tennessee, yet and still his whole family fought for the Confederacy, but he felt his heart belonged to the Union. And there he is, in the middle of a battle he called the Hornet's Nest, where the minute balls were flying so thick it looked like somebody had kicked over a hornet's nest. And he fired his last round, and he saw rebel soldiers charging at him out of the smoke and the fire, and he fixed his bayonet, planted himself, and plunged his bayonet into the belly of a rebel soldier. and looked up into the eyes of his own father. But such is the battle when brother fights brother. Who can forget Fredericksburg and the gallant charge of the Irish Brigade under Brigadier General Thomas Marr as they crossed the Rappahannock River into the teeth of Longstreet's Confederate cannon entrenched upon Marie's Heights? Wave after wave of gallant Irish soldiers charged and were mown down like new wheat. Yet so gallant was their charge that they were cheered on by the Irish in the Confederate ranks, even as they slaughtered them. But such is the battle when brother fights brother. So we're springing to the call from the east, from the west. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom, and we'll hurl the rebel crew from that land of the best. We're shouting the battle cry of freedom. It's the Union forever. Shouting the battle cry of freedom. On paper, war always seems like a good idea. Until you get in the thick of things, and you go, Lord have mercy, what made me think this was a good idea? You know, that war caused so many people to make these fateful decisions. You know, because let's face it, you're from Vermont. You know you're a Yankee. You know what I'm saying? You know you're a Yankee. You wouldn't know a biscuit if it pulled a gun on you. And if you're from Mississippi, you know you're a rebel. You go any further south, you're swimming in the Gulf with Free Willy. You know what I'm saying? But when you were from Virginia or Kentucky or North Carolina or Tennessee, what they call the Upper South, you had to choose which side you would fight on. And that's where the tragedy began. Because the enemy looked just like you. The enemy knew the same songs that you knew. The enemy prayed to the same God for the same victory, and God could not support both. That's the tragedy of civil war. It was a war in which we lost close to 1 million American lives. 750,000 soldiers died north and south. A lot of them weren't even counted. Ronda's great-great-grandfather, Lieutenant Colonel William R. Tedford, 11th Tennessee Confederacy, went home after they got their behinds kicked on Missionary Ridge. He said, you know, this fool Bragg that I'm working under, he's crazy. I'm going home. He said, I just got elected to the legislature. I'm going home. You know, Tennessee at that time was under federal control. There was no Confederate legislature, but hey, I'm going home. He died. The war was over April of 1865. He died October of 1865 because his body had suffered so much privation during the war. He's not even included in the count of who died. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the hero of the Little Round Top, the professor of rhetoric from Bowdoin College in Maine, died 20 some odd years after the war of wounds received in the war. And let's face it, a civil war, civilians die. Look at Rwanda, look at Sarajevo, look at Syria. Civilians die in a civil war. 1 million lives were lost. We were a nation of 20 million. 1 million died that this nation might live. That's why it's still an open wound. Are you starting to understand where I'm coming from to tell you this story? Nobody wins in a civil war. Nobody wins. Well, coming from East Tennessee, I'm always proud to tell people, I said, we was the last ones to join the Confederacy. Tennessee was. And I'm from East Tennessee. And East Tennessee were staunchly pro-union. They had referendum. You remember back in the days when people's vote decided what happened instead of the Supreme Court? Remember those days? Yeah. Referendum to see whether or not Tennessee would secede from the Union. In 3 referendums, East Tennessee voted overwhelmingly to stay in the Union. But Middle and West Tennessee, which had economic ties. Economics. See, that's the reason every war is fought. No matter what they tell you, somebody's got their hand in the till. That's why those wars are being fought. And if you study it, you see I'm telling you the truth. Because if I'm lying, I'm dying up here, children. Yeah. Dragged, kicking, and screaming East Tennessee was into the Confederacy. So the Confederacy had to send troops into East Tennessee to occupy it, to keep those Union folks from getting in harm's way. I always tell Ronda, her ancestors came over from Middle Tennessee over to East Tennessee to suppress my Union brethren and sisters. Yes, indeed. When I get mad at her, I remind her of that, you know. You know, in fact, you've heard of some of those East Tennessee Unionists. You know, Abraham Lincoln, 16th president, you know, he had him a Tennessean there as his vice president who took over after he was assassinated. A man from East Tennessee who used to be a tailor. His name was Andrew Johnson. Yeah, Andrew Johnson. He was an East Tennessee Unionist. And people like Parson Brownlow. I like old Parson Brownlow. He was a pro-slavery, pro-unionist. See, it was not evenly divided. See, that was a complicated war. Pro-slavery, pro-unionist editor of the Knoxville Whig and Rebel Ventilator. How you like the name of that? That's a great name for a newspaper. The Knoxville Whig and Rebel Ventilator. He published that under Confederate occupation. Little nut brown of a man, looked like Don Knotts on steroids. Oh, yeah, you see his picture, you know, I think he scared himself. You know, he was a little junkyard dog kind of a man, you know. And then, of course, there was Horace Maynard. Horace Maynard was a man who came from New England that moved down into East Tennessee and was in the legislature. I went to Maynard Elementary School. See, I always thought it was named after that guy that was on Dobie Gillis. You know, Maynard G. Krebs. You know, I didn't know. You know, and look it up, Google it. You know what I'm saying here. Maynard G. Krebs. But Maynard Elementary School. And Horace Maynard, he gave a speech, you know, because those guys, those East Tennessee Unionists were in such trouble that they actually had to escape from East Tennessee to get away from Confederate occupation. They actually had a white folks underground railroad to get them Unionists out of East Tennessee. They had these guys, they call them pilots. They would pilot the folks through all the gaps in the mountains to try to get them out of there because the Confederates were after them. And Horace Maynard gave a speech. He said, "We're leaving by the byways, but we're coming back by the highways. And they did too. Here's a song. Let me see. Going across the mountain, if I have to crawl, gonna give those rebel boys just a little of my rifle ball. I'm going across the mountain, oh, fare you well. Going across the mountain, you can hear my banjo tell. Got my knapsack on my back, powder it is dry. Going across the mountain, my darling, don't you cry. Going across the mountain, oh, fare you well. Going across the mountain, you can hear my banjo tell. Going across the mountain, could join them boys in blue. When this fighting's over, I'll come back to you. Going across the mountain, oh, fare you well. Going across the mountain, you can hear my banjo tell. When I'm gone, I'm coming through. When this fighting's over, honey child, I'll come back to you. Going across the mountain, oh, fare you well. Going across the mountain, you can hear my banjo tell. Going across the mountain, if I have to crawl, gonna give old Jeff's boys just a little of my rifle ball. I'm a-going across the mountain, oh, fare you well. Going across the mountain, you can hear my banjo tell. Thank you. Well, as I was telling you, there was these ways you could get through the mountains, you know, because nowadays you just take I-75, you know, down to up through Jellicoe Mountain there, you know. But back in them days, folks, you went the way nature told you it was the easiest way to go. So people would look to try to figure out the way the water was running, because they figured water's lazy, you know, it's going to take the easy way. So that's how you'd get through. So you'd find the gaps in the mountains that the water had already made a little way. And they had things like Baptist Gap and Powell Gap and Pennington Gap and Cumberland Gap. You may have heard of Cumberland Gap. They said that Cumberland Gap was discovered by this English guy named Doc Walker. I reckon the Cherokee just didn't know it was there, you know. And then later on, Daniel Boone, good old boy from Pennsylvania. See, a lot of people don't know that the Boones came out of Pennsylvania and moved on down through the Shenandoah Valley there, and then ended up in the Yadkin River Basin there in western North Carolina. And then, of course, he was what they call fiddle-footed. Couldn't stand to be any place long, so he said, I got to find there too many folks that moved. I can hear my neighbor's axe. It's time to move, you know. And so he found a little gap up. He followed Cumberland Gap. And they say he blazed the trail there. As a Boy Scout, the way you blaze the trail was you leave a little mark on the side of the tree there so the folks coming behind you can find the way. You do that now, they take you to jail. You understand? You know, you don't go through Cumberland Gap blazing the trail, but they say, I'll show you the trail over to the jail over here. You know? And so everybody said, well, maybe, you know, if we're going to be fighting this war, because, you know, people are going to come down through from Ohio, you know, them Yankees. You can't trust them, the Ohio Yankees. Lord have mercy. You know, they'd be coming down through Kentucky, and they're going to come down here to Tennessee to get us. We got to fortify the gaps. We got to fortify the gap. So they said, oh, Lord, coming the gaps the way they're coming. We got to get there. Boogity, 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 boogity. Everybody come running. Well, the first people that got there were the Confederates. And they said, we got to fortify the gap. So they said, we got to put some cannon up here. Because, if you're going to, if you're going to fight a war, you got to have some cannon. Somebody said, well, they got this big old cannon over there in the seacoast. Let's get this big old cannon. So they got this big old cannon that took, I think they said 200 horses, and I forgot how many thousand men to haul this thing up on top of the mountain. There's a place called Pinnacle Rock, way up on top of the mountain there. And they said you could see from Pinnacle Rock, you could see Kentucky and Virginia and Tennessee, and on a clear day, you could see North Carolina. Pinnacle Rock. And so they hauled this cannon. This is a big cannon. Woo! It was a big cannon. What was it? A big cannon. I can't hear you. What was it? A big cannon. And they said, woo! This cannon was so big. How big was it? This cannon was so big that they named it Long Tom. What was it called? Long Tom. I can't hear you. Long Tom. Long Tom. I don't know about you, but I get nervous. People go to naming their gun. Buddy, you mess with me, Roscoe will get you. Yeah. Long Tom. Woo! They say when Long Tom fired, you could hear it voice echo. Woo-wee! Long Tom's up there giving them Yankees what for? But there's a problem with having a cannon that big. Because I don't care who you are. What did Pat Garrett tell Billy the Kid? Billy, you fast. But there's always somebody who's just a little bit. Faster. On any given Sunday, any given NFL team can whip any other team. That's just the law. You can't get around that. That's one of them laws, So I don't care how big you are, how fortified you done fortified your gap. You might get your behind whipped one day and you got to run. Woo! Here they come. Here come the Yankees. We got to run. But the problem with going to run, you can't take Long Tom with you because he's too big. You got to leave Long Tom when you run. But the problem with leaving Long Tom is that the thing that ran you out of that position, and the folks that ran you out of that position, they be running behind you, and all of a sudden they look down and they go, look what they left. You take that thing and you aim it the other way. Dust off your behind before you get to Cleveland someplace. You understand? So what they would do is they would spike the cannon. Now, that don't mean take it to a frat house and make it drink, pure grain alcohol. And spiking the cannon is basically a tube with one end closed off back in those days, And then on the open end, you'd put down whatever powder you needed to fire that cannon, and then on top of that, you'd pack whatever you planned to fire at the enemy. Cannonball, chain shot, pieces of rail. I tell you, toward the end of the war, they were stuffing everything down in there. Your mother-in-law. She's bad, buddy. Let me fire Big Bertha at you, And then there would be a hole in the breech of the cannon where you could get at the powder. Okay? And then you would ignite that powder. It's all physics. It's exploding in there, and they ain't got but one way it can go. And that's what forces the cannonball out. You follow me so far? So to make that cannon inoperative, you had to plug up that hole. And the way you did it was you took a spike and you drove it down in the hole. And that's why they called it spiking the cannon. It wasn't a permanent solution, but at least it gave you time to get away while they was getting that spike out of there. Well, one other thing, there was a man named Braxton Bragg. Lord have mercy, I found out I am kin to more Southern generals. I don't know what's going on with my family, but I am kin to so many rebels. I don't know what it is. I guess we was masochists in my family or something. But Brother Braxton Bragg was a mean man. Nobody liked him. His men said that Braxton Bragg killed more Confederate soldiers by executing them than the Yankees killed in war. Because he didn't like folks from Tennessee and Kentucky, and that was most of his army. And the reason he didn't like them, his wife didn't like them. And fellas, if your wife don't like somebody, you better not like them. You understand what I'm saying? Because you got to sleep sometime. But anyway, Braxton Bragg, even during the war with Mexico, nobody liked him. Somebody tried to frag Bragg. That was we used to use that term back during the Vietnam War, my generation's war, where if you get one of them little 90-day wonders, them little ROTC guys about to get you killed, say, in the battle, he's gonna get killed. And so they would throw a grenade at him and blow him up. I don't know where it came from, Captain. And so they said they're gonna frag Bragg. They had them little cannon, them little bombs that looked like in Mad Magazine, the Spy versus Spy. Things look like a bowling ball with a thing. They slid that thing under his bunk, gonna kill him while he was asleep. Bluey! It killed everybody but Bragg in the tent. Woo! So anyway, nobody liked Bragg. Well, Rhonda's great-granddaddy that I told you about, William R. Tedford, the family stories that talk about him, we found he was a fiddle player. So he wasn't all bad. He was a musician. And at its height, there were no more than about 4,000 Confederates in the Gap at that time, but most of the times it was 1,000 to 2,000 Confederates holding the Gap. And there's a famous folk song that came out of there, and it's called Cumberland Gap. And I figure since he was a fiddle player, he probably had a hand in writing it, because if you know fiddle players, if there's music going on, they're there. Do I sleep or do I play music? Fiddle player says, I play music. Song, will you help us with this song? You gonna help us with this song? All right, the chorus goes, lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. We're gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. September morning, 62 September morning, 62 September morning, 62. Morgan's Yankees all withdrew. Won't you lay down, boys, take a little nap? Come on, lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. It's gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. They burn the hay, meal and the meat. They burn the hay, meal and the meat. They burn the hay, meal and the meat. They left them rebels with nothing to eat. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. They spike Long Tom on the mountaintop. They spike Long Tom on the mountaintop. Spike Long Tom on the mountaintop, and over the cliff they let him drop. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, we'll take a little nap. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. Braxton Bragg with his rebel band. Braxton Bragg with his rebel band. Braxton Bragg with his rebel band. Run George Morgan to the bluegrass land. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, won't you take a little nap? Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. Cumberland Gap is not very far. Cumberland Gap is not very far. Cumberland Gap is not very far. It's just a little piece from Middlesbrough. Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Lay down, boys, won't you take a little nap? Lay down, boys, take a little nap. Gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap. Gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap. Yeah! Gonna raise hell in Cumberland Gap. Thank you.
There was a period in February of 1862 in Nashville, Tennessee, called the Great Panic. And it was called that because Fort Donelson, which was north of Nashville, almost up to the Kentucky border, had just fallen to the Union Army, and the Army was marching southward. So they were going to make it to Nashville. The people in Nashville knew that, but they didn't know when they were going to get there. They didn't know what day, they didn't know what hour, they didn't know what minute they might get there. So the whole city was thrown into a state of bedlam. I mean, chaos reigned. The Yankees are coming, the Yankees are coming. And people were running around. You know that scene in Gone with the Wind when they're burning Atlanta? That's what it was like in Nashville at that time. In fact, people would be going up to the commissary store with a shotgun, give me that side of beef. And then they ended up trying to leave town. There was a huge exodus from town. The trains were packed. People were even riding on tops of the trains trying to get out of there. They even burned a couple of bridges that led northward out of town, trying to slow the Union Army down a little bit. So on the morning of February 20th, 1862, there was a pall of smoke over the city, and it was still in a state of bedlam with people running around in the streets. But my great-great-grandfather that Sparky talked about, William Tedford, was in Nashville, in the courthouse, getting married. He was in the Army of Tennessee, eventually became a lieutenant colonel, and he had been stationed at Cumberland Gap, and he was on furlough and decided to come to Nashville, Tennessee to see his sweetheart. And so they got married, but he knew that as soon as that happened, he needed to get out of this city, because if he were there when the Union Army came, he would be taken prisoner of war. So he left, and sweethearts were separated once again. More music came out of the Civil War than any other war in history. And some of the songs that the soldiers would sing would make them homesick. I mean, they would want to leave, and some of them did. They deserted. But they were eventually banned from singing some of the songs because of that, on both sides, the Union and Confederate. There were a couple of songs that they were both banned from singing. One was Home Sweet Home, and one was a song we're going to do, a love song called Lorena. The years creep slowly by, Lorena. The snow is on the grass again. The sun's low down the sky, Lorena. The frost gleams where the flowers have been. The heart throbs on as warmly now as when the summer days were nigh. Oh, the sun can never dip so low, adown affection's cloudless sky. 100 months have passed, Lorena, since last I held that hand in mine and felt the
the dying of the day, and hear the distant church bells chime.
Well, I've been doing some writing the last few years, and last year a publisher published a historical novel that I wrote, and it's based on Harriet Tubman's work during the Civil War that some people don't know about. Back early on in the war, 1861, the Union took some of the islands off the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. And when they did that, the slave owners fled inland, and then the slaves were left out there, and then some of the slaves escaped to there as well. So they ended up with about 10,000 slaves out there. And they sent a call to the north for people to come down and help out with medical care and education. One of the people that came down was Harriet Tubman. And she had kind of a quiet start as a nurse, but soon the Union Army found out that she had special skills for slipping around in the woods without being detected. Wonder how she got those skills. But they put her to work as a spy, and she found out where the rebels had planted torpedoes in a river down there, the Combahee River. It's spelled Combahee, C-O-M-B-A-H-E-E, but down there they slur it and call it the Combahee River. And then after she delivered that information to them, they turned around and asked her to go on an expedition up the river. And she did. She went on that expedition. They navigated around the torpedoes, and they ended up destroying so much property, railroads, bridges. In fact, they called it the Combahee River Raid. But something else happened on that expedition. They were going up there, and on either side of the river were slaves that were working. It was early morning, and they saw these gunboats coming, and word spread pretty quickly that they were Union gunboats, friendly gunboats. So the slaves started grabbing everything they could and rushing down to the gunboat to be taken aboard, to be rescued, taken away from slavery. And they did take them aboard. One woman, Harriet Tubman, told stories about this later on in her life. She said one woman was trying to make it down to the boat to be rescued, had a couple of kids in each hand, and at the last minute decided to grab this big old pot of rice that she had cooked because she didn't want to leave that behind for the rebel master, so she had that on her head, and then she had another kid on her shoulders, so she was struggling, trying to make it down to the gunboat. And in the meantime, there's this kid on her shoulders staring right down into that pot of rice. And he saw an opportunity, and he took advantage of it. He started having a meal, scooping it into his mouth on the way down to the riverboat. You know, dinner and a show. But he got down there, and some other people, you know, they even grabbed livestock. So it was kind of like a miniature Noah's Ark going down the river, you know, with the chickens, you know, squawking and pigs squealing. In fact, one person brought a couple of pigs on board, a black pig and a white pig, and they named one Beauregard and one Jeff Davis. But Harriet Tubman ended up, and on this expedition, they ended up rescuing over 750 slaves on that one expedition, more than twice the number that she had rescued on a piecemeal basis during her work on the Underground Railroad. All of the soldiers on this expedition were African American soldiers. They had just started letting them fight for their own freedom. And the head, the white officer in charge, was Colonel James Montgomery. But Harriet Tubman, by this time, had rescued so many people from slavery that they started calling her Moses.
I said, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Help me sing it. Wade in the water, children, wade. Dressed in red, you know God's gonna trouble the water. Must be the children Miss Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Come on and wade in the water, children, wade. Get your feet wet, children, wade. God's gonna trouble the water. Who are those children dressed in white? God's gonna trouble the water. It must be the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, children, wade in the water. Children, wade in the water. Children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble. I said, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. I said, God's gonna trouble the water. You know God's gonna trouble the water. you.
Thank you. Cut out another song or two here, but I mentioned that I had written a historical novel about that. The people down there, the slaves, were of the Gullah culture, and that's because they had been isolated from a lot of other people, and they had developed their own culture, including even their own language, which was a mixture of English and some of the African tribal languages. So they, talked differently than Harriet Tubman talked to. She was from way up here. I know y'all think you're Southerners, but she was from way up in Maryland. And so, it's a little bit of a language difference there. They had not even heard of her. But you can bet after that expedition, after that rescue, they knew about her. And they ended up, they say, according to Gullah legend, they wrote a song in tribute to her. But they didn't write it as Swing Low Sweet Chariot. They wrote it as Swing Low Sweet Harriet, coming for to carry me home. And Swing Low Sweet Harriet is the title of my book.
They said, coming down to the low country to take them home, and if you start thinking about the lyrics of the song, it makes perfect sense. Well, we're going to close out with the 1.5 songs here. It's ironic. It's ironic that the battle anthem for the South was written by a Yankee. Not only was it written by a Yankee, some people say the Yankee that wrote it was Daniel Decatur Emmett from Ohio. He's the one that wrote Old Dan Tucker, too, But recent research has shown that Daniel Decatur Emmett learned this song from a couple of black minstrel performers from Ohio named Benjamin and Louis Snowden. In fact, written on their tombstone, we taught Dixie to Dan Emmett. Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland, in Dixieland, where I was born in. Early on one frosty morning, look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Then I wish I was in Dixie, away, away. In Dixieland I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Another son of Maryland, Frederick Augustus Bailey, better known by his given name, by his chosen name, Frederick Douglass, asked his good friend Lincoln, "Why are you trying to fight this war with one hand tied behind your back? Let the black man fight for his own freedom." You've heard of the famous 54th and 55th Massachusetts. Ronda just told you about the 2nd South Carolina United States Colored Troop on that great raid up the Combahee River. But let's not forget the 1st of Arkansas. We're the bully soldiers of the 1st of Arkansas. We're fighting for the Union, we are fighting for the law. We can hit a rebel further than a white man ever saw. As we go marching on, singing glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. As we go marching on, we have done with hoeing cotton, we have done with hoeing corn. We're colored Yankee soldiers now, sure as you are born. When the masters hear us yelling, they will think it's Gabriel's horn. As we go marching on. Help me sing it now, come on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. As we go marching on. See there above the center where the flag is waving bright. We're marching out of slavery. We're bound for freedom's light. We mean to show Jeff Davis how the African can fight. As we go marching on. Help me out now. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. As we go march, one more time singing glory, glory, hallelujah, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. As we go marching on. God bless you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this rousing afternoon with Sparky and Rhonda Rucker. If you would like to attend a Music Forum concert, please note that each Friday during the fall and spring semesters, the music department of CCBC presents Music Forum concerts at 12:20 in the recital hall of the Arts and Humanities Hall on the Essex campus. These concerts are an integral part of our students' education, and all of the concerts are free and open to the public. For more information on Music Forum, please call 443-840-1521. I'm Monica Otal. Thank you for watching CCBC TV's Arts Showcase.
Across the mountain, if I had to crawl, gonna give old Jeff's boys just a little of my rifle ball. I'm going across the mountain, oh, fare you well. Going across the mountain, you can hear my banjo sound.